There are people who don't break all at once. They break quietly, piece by piece, until one day they wake up and realize they've been living as a ghost inside their own life. This is the story of Clara Hayes, a woman who spent years apologizing for taking up space, until the day she finally decided to stop. Clara had always been the kind of woman people talked over, not because she was weak but because she never believed she deserved to be heard. From childhood, the world whispered the same message. You're too much of this, not enough of that. Too big, too emotional, too sensitive, not pretty enough, not confident enough, not anything enough. By 34, she carried those words the way some people carry scars, invisible but heavy. Her partner of 5 years, Mark, didn't help. He wasn't cruel. Cruelty at least has edges. Mark hurt her in softer ways. In the sighs he made when she entered a room. In the way he spoke to her like she was a burden he hadn't chosen. In the silence he weaponized whenever she needed affection. The kind of hurt that drains you slowly, like a faucet left leaking in the dark. But Clara stayed, 'cause people like Clara always stay. They convince themselves that crumbs of love are enough, as long as someone is willing to toss them in their direction. But everything broke the day she found the receipt. It was tucked inside Mark's jacket pocket, a dinner for two at a restaurant he once told her was too fancy for someone like her. The timestamp was from the night he claimed he was working late. Clara didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't even cry. She just stood there. There are moments in life when a truth lands so heavily that it doesn't shatter you. It empties you. And Clara felt the emptiest she had ever been. When Mark walked in later, smelling like expensive cologne he never wore for her, she simply asked, "Do you love her?" Mark froze. That was all the answer she needed. He didn't deny it. He didn't fight for her. He just looked at her with that same expression he always had. The one that said, "You were never enough for me." And something in Clara, something silent and patient and tired, finally snapped. She packed a single bag, left the apartment, left the life she built around a man who never thought she deserved better. That night, she sat alone in her car in a grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding her together. Her whole life felt like a bad joke. The years of dieting, the years of shrinking herself, the years of begging for a kind of love she thought she had to earn. For the first time, she asked herself, why am I fighting so hard to stay where I'm not wanted? And that question, that single painful question, was the beginning of everything. Clara didn't go home. She didn't even know where home was supposed to be anymore. So she drove, 4 hours, past neighborhoods where families were having dinner, past gas stations glowing in the dark, past quiet streets where people still believed in love. Around midnight, she pulled over beside a small park, the kind with a single bench and a street lamp that flickered like it was too tired to shine. She stepped out of the car and breathed in the cold night air. For the first time in years, the world felt completely silent. And in that silence, Clara finally heard herself. Not the voice of shame, not the voice of Mark, not the voice of society who had trained her to apologize for taking up space. Her own voice, a small, fragile whisper. I deserve more than this. It wasn't loud. It wasn't confident. But it was honest. She sat on the bench and stared up at the sky, wondering how she had spent her whole life trying to be smaller, in her body, in her presence, in her dreams. She remembered being a child, laughing loudly, running freely. She remembered the girl she used to be, before the world told her she wasn't enough. That girl wasn't gone. She was buried. And Clara realized something both terrifying and freeing. If she wanted her life back, she would have to dig herself out. Alone. No one was coming to save her. No apology from Mark would fix her. No crash diet. No validation from strangers. Healing wasn't going to be a moment. It would be a choice. And Clara wasn't ready for joy. She wasn't ready for hope. But she was ready for one thing: to stop breaking herself to fit into a life that hurt. The next morning, Clara walked into a local gym. Not the fancy kind filled with influencers and neon slogans. A small, old-school place that smelled like metal and effort. The kind of place where people went to rebuild themselves, not to show off. She stood at the entrance for almost a full minute, frozen, battling the voice in her head. You don't belong here. Everyone will stare at you. You're not strong enough for this. She almost turned around. But then she remembered the other voice. The new one, the one she heard last night on that lonely bench. I deserve more. So she stepped inside. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. A real smile. Not the polite type people force, but a warm, welcoming one. First time here, she asked. Clara nodded. Well, the woman said, everyone starts somewhere. Those 3 words cracked something open inside her. Everyone starts somewhere. For the first week, Clara didn't do anything dramatic. She walked on the treadmill. She stretched. She learned how to breathe correctly. She tried not to compare herself to anyone. But every day she showed up, no matter how heavy her heart felt. And slowly, her body began to remember itself. Her legs, once shaky, grew steadier. Her breathing deepened. Her steps became more certain. She wasn't chasing a glow-up. She wasn't trying to win Mark back. She wasn't trying to impress strangers online. She was trying to become someone she could live with. And that was enough. After a few weeks, Clara started noticing something she hadn't felt in years. Not confidence, not pride, but presence. She was no longer drifting through her days like a shadow in her own life. She was showing up. For herself. For the woman she had abandoned long before Mark ever did. One afternoon, after finishing a slow set of squats, she caught herself smiling. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because she realized something powerful. Her life was no longer happening to her. She was happening to her life. On the drive home, she rolled down the windows and let the wind move through her hair. Felt like breathing for the first time. She cleaned her apartment. Not out of obligation, but out of respect for the home she was rebuilding inside herself. She cooked real meals again. Food that nourished instead of punished. She bought a journal and filled the first page with one sentence. Dear Clara, I'm learning to love you. And slowly, subtly, her world began to expand. She made friends at the gym. 2 women who lifted heavier weights than most of the men. They didn't judge her. They didn't look at her body. They looked at her effort. They cheered when she finished her sets. They texted her on days she didn't show up. They reminded her that growth wasn't supposed to be pretty, just honest. For the first time in her adult life, Clara wasn't being diminished. She was being seen. And the more she was seen, the more she started to see herself. But healing isn't a straight line. 2 months into her new routine, Clara had a day that broke her. She woke up feeling heavy, not in her body but in her spirit. The memories came flooding back. Mark's sighs, his indifference, the quiet rejection she endured for years. The old voice returned, cruel and familiar. You're still not enough. She skipped the gym, stayed in bed, scrolled through pictures of people who looked happier, stronger, more put together. By afternoon, she felt like she was drowning again. That evening, her gym friend Maya showed up at her door with takeout and a face full of concern. You disappeared, Maya said softly. Clara shrugged. It's stupid. I felt like I was back at day 1. Maya sat beside her. No, she said firmly. You're not back at day 1. Day 1 was the day you still believed you were unworthy. Today, you're just tired. That's different. Clara's eyes filled with tears she didn't want to admit were there. You're allowed bad days, Maya continued. You've carried pain for years. You think 2 months erases that. Healing doesn't look like a straight line. It looks like this: showing up for yourself even when you don't feel like it. And when you can't, we show up for you. Those words hit deeper than Clara expected. No one had ever said "we" to her in that way. That night, Clara cried. Not the sharp, painful cry of heartbreak, but the softer kind that comes when someone finally feels safe enough to let go. And the next morning she got up, put on her shoes, and went back to the gym. Not because she felt strong, but because she was learning that strength wasn't a feeling. It was a decision. 3 months later, something extraordinary began to happen. Not to her body, but to her identity. Her reflection started to look different. Not because she was thinner or stronger or more toned, but because she finally recognized the woman staring back. Her shoulders sat a little higher. Her eyes held a quiet defiance. And her smile no longer looked borrowed. She was becoming someone she had once believed she could never be. But life has a way of testing you just when you begin to rise. One Saturday afternoon, while shopping for groceries, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Clara!" She froze. It was Mark. He looked surprised, impressed even, and for a moment she felt that old instinct rise inside her. The one that begged for his approval. But then she remembered the bench. The gym. Tears. The rebuilding. The woman she had become. Mark stepped closer. "You look different," he said, eyes tracing her face the way he never had before. Clara didn't flinch. "Or maybe," he added, "I just forgot how beautiful you are." The words once would have melted her. Not today. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time felt nothing. No longing. No ache. No desire to shrink herself to fit back into his world. She simply said, "I hope you're doing well," and walked past him. No drama. No revenge speech. Just peace. And oddly, that was the moment she realized how far she had come. Strength wasn't lifting heavier weights. Strength was knowing when a chapter was over, and choosing not to reread it. After seeing Mark, Clara expected the past to come crashing back. But it didn't. Instead, something unexpected happened. She felt lighter. Not because she had proven anything to him, but because she finally understood. She hadn't transformed to be seen. She had transformed to finally see herself. Her workouts changed. They weren't fueled by pain anymore. They weren't an escape. They were a celebration. A conversation between her and the body she had spent years hating. She started lifting heavier, running farther, laughing louder. People at the gym noticed. Her coach would say, "You've got more in you." And this time she believed him. Her friends would cheer. "There she is." And this time she didn't hide. One evening, after a long workout, she stood in front of the mirror in the women's locker room. Her hair was damp. Her skin glowed. Her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. But what struck her wasn't the physical change. It was the expression on her face. She looked proud. For the first time in her life, Clara wasn't waiting for permission to feel beautiful. She wasn't chasing validation like it was oxygen. She wasn't trying to be smaller, in shape or in spirit. She was standing, fully unapologetically, in the space she once believed she had to shrink. And then came the moment that sealed her transformation. As she stepped out of the gym, the sky was a deep shade of purple, the kind that only shows up on days when the world feels gentle. She took a long breath and whispered to no one, "I'm finally home." Not a place, person, herself. As the months rolled into a year, Clara's transformation became something far larger than fitness. It was spiritual, emotional, foundational. She began volunteering at a local women's center on weekends, helping others who felt lost, abandoned, or invisible. Not because she saw herself as a savior, but because she finally understood what it felt like to be seen. One afternoon, while organizing donated clothes, a young woman approached her. She looked exhausted, fragile, the way Clara once did. Do you work here? The girl asked. Clara shook her head. No, I'm just here to help. The girl hesitated, then whispered, How did you get better? Clara felt her heart twist. She saw the fear, the shame, the longing for a way out. So she didn't talk about the gym, or weight loss, or Mark, or revenge, or glow-ups. Instead, she said softly, I stopped waiting for someone else to save me. The girl's eyes filled instantly. Clara sat beside her, told her the truth, the hard truth. That broken version of you. She isn't weak. She's tired. And she deserves rest, not punishment. Healing starts the moment you decide you belong to yourself again. The girl cried into her hands. Clara held her until the shaking stopped. That evening, as Clara walked back to her car, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Her journey was no longer about running from pain. It was about turning her pain into something that could light the path for someone else. She wasn't just rebuilding a life. She was becoming a lighthouse. And the most beautiful part, she had no idea how many people her light would eventually reach. Months later, on a warm Saturday morning, Clara walked back into the same diner where everything had begun. Not the day Mark humiliated her, but the day she decided her story wasn't over. The bell above the door chimed softly. The smell of coffee and pancakes rushed over her like a memory trying to hug her. She didn't come here for closure. She didn't need it anymore. She simply wanted to prove to herself that she could walk into the place she once feared and feel peace. She took a seat by the window, the same booth where she had once cried quietly, hoping no one would notice. But she wasn't the same woman. The waitress approached, eyes widening. Clara. Oh my goodness, you look. Clara smiled gently. Different. I know. No, the waitress said. You look alive. They shared a quiet moment. Two women who remembered the same storm, but from different shores. Clara ordered a coffee. Black. Simple. Grounded. As she waited, she noticed something she hadn't expected. Across the diner, a young couple was arguing quietly. The kind of low, tense exchange that hides years of unspoken pain. The woman looked tired, hollow, holding back tears. The man looked frustrated, lost in his own storm. For a second, Clara felt the old ache. The instinct to shrink, to avoid, to disappear. But she didn't. Her heart had changed direction long ago. She didn't stare. She didn't judge. She simply breathed, letting compassion settle where fear used to live. Because she wasn't here to relive her past. She was here to reclaim it. She lifted her coffee, closed her eyes, and whispered inside herself, You made it. You really made it. And in that quiet booth, sunlight washing over her face, she realized something profound. She no longer needed a hero. She had become her own. As Clara sipped her coffee, a sudden shadow fell across the table. She looked up and froze. Mark. He stood there, thinner, older, worn in a way that didn't come from age but from consequence. His shoulders sagged under the weight of a life that had finally caught up with him. Clara, he whispered, voice uncertain, almost afraid. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink, didn't rush to fill the silence like she once would have. Instead, she simply answered calmly, Yes, it's me. Mark swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I didn't expect to see you here. You look good. She nodded. Thank you. He stared at the floor, shame burning through him. I've been going to meetings, anger management, counseling, trying to get my life back together. Clara didn't feel the old ache, the fear, the desperation, the need for closure. She felt something much quieter. Distance, perspective, freedom. I'm glad you're getting help, she said gently. And she meant it. Mark's voice cracked. I don't expect forgiveness. I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. Once, those words would have shattered her. Now they simply passed through her like wind through open windows. "Mark," she said softly, "you don't owe me anything. And I don't owe you anything back. We both survived what we needed to learn." He blinked, confused by her grace, the kind he never knew how to give. Clara stood up, gathering her things. Not in anger. Not in fear. In peace. "Take care of yourself," she said before walking past him. And as she stepped outside, sunlight warming her skin, she realized the truth. Forgiveness wasn't about letting him back in. It was about letting herself out. When Clara stepped outside, the cool breeze wrapped around her like an old friend, brushing away the heaviness of the past few minutes. She didn't look back, not out of pride, but because she no longer needed to. For the first time in years, her heart felt quiet. She walked toward the small garden behind the diner, a place she'd discovered during her first weeks of rebuilding her life. It wasn't anything spectacular. Wooden benches, a few stubborn flowers, the distant hum of traffic. But to her it was sacred. Space for breathing. A space for remembering who she was becoming. She sat down on her favorite bench and watched as the sunlight filtered through the leaves, splintering into gold. The world felt strangely still, as if holding its breath for her. And in that stillness, a memory rose, the day she had first left Mark. She remembered packing her bags with shaking hands, terrified but determined. She remembered sleeping in her car for 2 nights because she had nowhere else to go. She remembered convincing herself she had made a mistake, that she wasn't strong enough, that she should go back. But she didn't. And sitting there now, she realized something she had never allowed herself to feel fully. She was proud of herself. Not because everything had worked out, it hadn't. Not because life had become easier, it hadn't. But because she had survived the version of herself who believed she wasn't worth saving. The version who accepted crumbs. Who apologized for everything. Who mistook suffering for loyalty. Clara closed her eyes and exhaled, long and steady. She wasn't that woman anymore. And whatever came next, love, loneliness, joy, uncertainty, she would face it with a heart rebuilt by honesty, not fear. Her phone buzzed lightly in her pocket. It was Emily. "Coffee tomorrow. Big news." Clara smiled. Life, gently and quietly, was moving again. And this time she wasn't chasing it. She was choosing it. The next morning, Clara woke earlier than usual. Not because she was anxious, but because something in her chest felt lighter, as if a weight she'd carried for years had finally loosened its grip. She dressed simply, tied her hair back, and walked to the little cafe where Emily liked to meet. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside, releasing a wave of warm air and the smell of fresh pastries. Emily was already there, waving with the kind of excitement that made Clara smile despite herself. "You look radiant," Emily said, squeezing her hand. "Something happened." Clara laughed quietly. I think I finally closed a chapter one didn't realize was still open." Emily didn't press. She didn't need to. Their friendship was the kind built on intuition rather than explanations. "Well," Emily said, leaning in, "I have news." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Big news, you said." Emily nodded, eyes shining. "I got the job. The one I applied for months ago. The one I thought I had no chance at." Clara's heart lifted. "Emily, that's incredible. You earned that." Emily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I only applied because of you." "Me? You told me to stop waiting for permission to live my life. You said courage isn't loud, it's consistent." She shrugged softly. "I listened." Clara felt her throat tighten, not with sadness but with a kind of awe, because she had spent so long believing she had nothing left to offer anyone. Yet here was her friend, telling her that even in her darkest season, her words had carried light. "You did that, Emily," Clara said. "All I did was remind you of what you already had." Emily shook her head. "No, Clara. You reminded me of who I could become. The waitress placed 2 coffees on the table. The world around them hummed, casual, ordinary, alive. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Maybe healing wasn't just about rebuilding yourself. Maybe it was also about realizing that your scars could light the way for someone else. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt something tender begin to bloom inside her. Purpose. That afternoon, Clara walked home with a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. The sidewalk glistened from a light drizzle, and every puddle reflected a world that suddenly felt gentler, more possible. She paused at a crosswalk and watched people rushing by. Briefcases, umbrellas, tired faces, hurried footsteps. She used to envy them, used to believe everyone else had their lives figured out while she was barely standing. But now she understood something deeply human. Most people aren't living perfect lives. They're surviving storms no one sees. And maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she once believed. As she reached her apartment door, she noticed an envelope tucked beneath the mat. No name on it. No return address. Her heart fluttered with caution as she stepped inside and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in a shaky, uneven script. Thank you for not hating me. I know I don't deserve your kindness. I'm trying to fix what I broke, not to win you back, but to make sure I never hurt anyone like that again. I hope you build a life full of everything I couldn't give you. Mark. Clara sank onto the couch, the letter resting lightly in her hands. Not long ago, those words would have pulled her back into the past, into guilt, fear, uncertainty. But now they felt like something else entirely. Closure. Not because Mark had changed or because he apologized, but because she no longer needed anything from him to move forward. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer, not out of sentiment, but out of respect for the woman she used to be. The woman who tried her best. The woman who stayed too long. The woman who finally left. Clara took a deep breath, her chest rising with a calm that felt earned. Healing wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with fanfare or miracles. It came quietly, through hard choices, soft mornings, and the courage to let go of what once felt impossible to release. She stood, walked to the window, and watched the rain ease into sunlight. A new chapter was waiting, and this time she would walk into it whole. That evening, Clara decided to take a walk, something she hadn't done in years without a reason. No errands, no obligations, just movement for the sake of feeling alive. The neighborhood was quiet, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights. A faint breeze rustled the leaves above her, and for the first time, she noticed how peaceful the world could feel when you weren't drowning inside it. She passed the small bookstore at the corner, the same one she used to visit before her life had been consumed by survival. The lights were still on, a soft amber glow spilling onto the sidewalk. On impulse she walked inside. The smell of old paper and ink wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Rows of forgotten stories lined the shelves, waiting, patient, unhurried, for someone to pick them up again. She ran her fingers along the spines, letting memories surface. There was a time when she devoured books, believing each one held a map to a life she hadn't yet lived. Somewhere along the line, she had stopped opening them, stopped dreaming, stopped imagining a world where she mattered. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Looking for anything special?" the shop owner asked, adjusting her glasses with a kind smile. Clara hesitated, then answered softly, "Something hopeful." The woman nodded knowingly and handed her a thin, weathered paperback. "No story fixes everything," she said gently, "but a good one can remind you that you're not done yet." Clara held the book to her chest. She wasn't done. Outside, the night air felt different, as if the world itself was whispering encouragement in every small breeze. She realized then that healing wasn't just about letting go of the past. It was also about reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned while surviving it. Curiosity, wonder, As she walked home with the book tucked under her arm, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A quiet excitement for tomorrow. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise. Not because she was restless, but because, for the first time in years, she wanted to see the day begin. She made coffee, wrapped herself in a soft blanket, and sat by the window as the horizon slowly shifted from charcoal to gold. There was something sacred about watching the world wake up. Something that reminded her that beginnings don't always announce themselves with fireworks. Sometimes they slip in quietly, like a shy apology from life. As she sipped her coffee, she opened the book she'd bought from the little shop the night before. The first page had a handwritten note inside. To whoever finds this, may this story remind you that broken things can grow back stronger. Not the same, not perfect, but beautifully different. Clara smiled. The timing felt intentional, though she wasn't sure if she believed in signs anymore. Still, maybe some things weren't meant to be understood, only received. She spent the next hour reading, losing herself in words that somehow echoed her own journey. Every line felt like it had been written for someone who had walked through fire and come out softer, not harder. Halfway through, she set the book down and whispered to herself, "I'm allowed to start over." Saying it out loud made it real. Then her phone buzzed. A message from a number she didn't recognize. "Hi Clara, this is Daniel. Emily gave me your number. She said you might need help fixing a shelf. I'm nearby if you'd like a hand." Clara stared at the message for a long moment. She wasn't looking for anything. Not love, not distraction, not rescue. Her life wasn't a void anymore. It wasn't waiting to be filled. But something about the simplicity of the message, the gentleness, the absence of pressure, felt safe. She typed back slowly. "Hi, Daniel. I'd appreciate that." As she hit send, she felt no guilt, no fear, no pressure. Just openness. Not to another person, but to possibility. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a threat. Felt like a doorway. Daniel arrived later that afternoon, carrying a small toolbox and an easy smile. The kind that didn't demand anything, didn't push, didn't invade. Clara opened the door cautiously, almost surprised by her own calm. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, wiping rain from his jacket. "Where's this rebellious shelf I've heard so much about?" His light-hearted tone made her laugh. A quiet, unpolished laugh she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. She led him to the living room, where the shelf leaned sideways like it had given up on life entirely. Daniel knelt and began working, humming under his breath. He didn't pry, didn't glance around, didn't try to fill the silence. He simply existed beside her gently. Clara stood there for a moment, uncertain. She wasn't used to comfort without cost, kindness without expectation. "Emily told me you do woodwork," she asked. "Yeah," he said with a shrug. "It's how I stay sane. Some people meditate. I sand furniture until I forget why I was stressed." Clara smiled. There was something soothing about his presence. Not exciting, not overwhelming, but steady. The shelf clicked into place. Daniel stood, dusting his hands. "All fixed. That fast." "Well," he said, grinning, "I've had practice rescuing furniture from emotional crises." She laughed again. As he packed up, Clara felt a small tug in her chest. Not attraction exactly, but possibility. A door gently nudging open. The doorway, Daniel paused. "If you ever need help with anything, or just want company without talking, I'm around." Clara nodded. "Thank you. Really." When the door closed, she leaned against it, exhaling slowly. It wasn't romance. It wasn't fate. It wasn't a new beginning disguised as a man. It was something quieter. Proof that her heart could stay open without losing itself. That she could let someone close, without collapsing into old patterns. For the first time she realized. Healing didn't mean never being afraid. It meant not letting fear decide who could stand beside you. A week later, Clara was standing in line at the grocery store, lost in thought, when it happened. One of those small, unexpected moments that tests the strength you've spent months building. Raised voice. Sharp. Uncontrolled. Too familiar. She turned her head just slightly and saw a man berating the cashier, a young woman no older than 20. His words were harsh, dripping with entitlement and intimidation. Clara's breath caught. Her pulse quickened. A flash of the past surged through her. The shouting, the fear, the helplessness of shrinking into herself. For a heartbeat, she felt the old instinct rising. Freeze. Stay quiet. Disappear. But then something deeper pushed through. Not anger, not bravado, clarity. She stepped forward. Sir. Her voice was steady, even calm. You need to stop speaking to her that way. The man turned, irritated. And who are you supposed to be? Clara held his gaze. Someone who isn't afraid of you. The cashier's eyes widened. The man scoffed but stepped back, muttering under his breath before storming out. The line fell silent. Clara exhaled slowly, surprised by her own courage. Not loud, not aggressive, but rooted. Grounded. Oh. The cashier whispered. Thank you, he scared me. Clara smiled gently. I know the feeling. You're safe now. As she walked to her car, her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the realization of what just happened. She had stepped into the very space where she used to collapse. She had become the woman she once needed. In the quiet of her car, she let a tear roll down, not of sadness but pride. Healing hadn't made her harder. It had made her honest. And honest people aren't powerless. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Made extra soup tonight. Want some? Clara laughed softly to herself. Maybe life wasn't testing her. Maybe it was showing her who she had grown into. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table with Daniel's soup warming her hands. Simple. Comforting. Human. She felt calm. Not the fragile silence she used to mistake for peace, but the real kind. The kind that settles in slowly, like a guest who knows they're welcome. When Daniel arrived to pick up his container, he lingered at the doorway, hesitant. Mind if I sit for a minute? He asked. Of course, Clara said, motioning to the chair across from her. They talked, lightly at first, about work, the weather, the ridiculous cat that kept sneaking into his workshop. But somewhere between the quiet pauses, he looked at her with the kind of sincerity people rarely use anymore. You know, he said softly, Emily told me you've been through a lot. I'm not asking for details. I just want you to know. You never have to explain anything to me. Clara felt her throat tighten, not because she needed him, but because she finally understood she didn't. I'm not looking for anything right now, she admitted gently. Daniel nodded, unbothered. I didn't come here hoping you were. She exhaled, relieved. For so long, every connection had felt like a threat, a risk of losing herself again. But with Daniel there was no pressure. He wasn't asking to be part of her life. He was simply offering space in his, if she ever chose to step into it. Clara leaned back in her chair, letting the moment breathe. I'm learning how to be okay on my own, she said. That's a good thing, he replied. Being whole doesn't make you unavailable. It just means no one gets to complete you. They only get to walk alongside you. A quiet truth settled between them. Clara realized something profound. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of being alone. She wasn't afraid of starting over. She wasn't afraid of choosing herself. When Daniel left, he didn't ask for a hug or a promise or a future. He just smiled and said, "Take your time. Good things don't rush." She closed the door and whispered into the quiet. I'm finally not rushing myself anymore. That night, Clara fell asleep without fear, without longing, without emptiness. As peace. Years later, people who met Clara for the first time often described her the same way. Steady. Soft in a way that felt strong. Strong in a way that didn't need to be loud. They never guessed the storms she'd walked through. They never saw the nights she cried into the silence, the mornings she dragged herself out of bed with nothing but a hope the size of a grain of sand. They only saw the woman she had become, not because life had been kind, but because she had learned how to be kind to herself. One quiet morning, sitting at her favorite booth in Maggie's diner, Clara watched the world outside the window. Cars passing, people rushing, life unfolding without her needing to chase it. The waitress placed a coffee in front of her and smiled. "Still black, right?" Clara returned the smile. "Always." As she wrapped her hands around the warm cup, she remembered the stranger's words from years ago. "Sometimes God breaks your heart to save your soul." Back then those words felt like a wound. Now they felt like a doorway she had finally walked through. Her life wasn't perfect. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some grand success story. But it was hers. Honest, quiet, whole. And that was enough. Maybe you've never lived Clara's exact story. But if you've lived long enough, you've felt echoes of it. The collapse you didn't see coming. The silence that forced you to face yourself. The slow rebuild that felt invisible to everyone but you. And if you're there now, in the middle of your own unraveling, hear this. You're not broken. You're becoming. Life isn't punishing you. It's shaping you. And one day you'll sit where Clara sits. Not triumphant, not untouchable, but grounded in the quiet miracle of having survived. What you once thought would end you. When that day comes, you'll understand. The breaking wasn't the end. It was the beginning.